Good evening and welcome to our book festival event, No Breaking Point, The Legacy of Ara. First, I'd like to thank the Cushwa Center for the study of American Catholicism for their sponsorship of this event. We greatly appreciate your partnership and friendship. And then I'm also thrilled to introduce our speaker for this evening, Marco Hubbard. Mark Hubbard is the official authorized biographer of Coach Ara Parseghian, having worked closely with Ara's family and personal files to fully capture the personality, courage, and character of an incredible man. He is also the author of Undisputed Notre Dame, National Champions 1966, and co-author of Forgotten Four, Notre Dame's Greatest Backfield in the 1953 undefeated season. Please join me in welcoming Mark and giving him a round of applause.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I'm delighted that you're all here. Now I know I'm going to sell at least 6 books. So I prepared this for this event. I've been doing these around town for various audiences, and this is one that's been tailored for you folks. And you already heard the title, the cover of the book. You've seen the book. The beauty of this cover is that it's probably one of the most famous pictures of Ara ever taken. It was after the second Cotton Bowl game when we were victorious. And it's just a black and white photo, but the press did a very nice job of colorizing this. And everybody that sees the cover thinks it's really good. So I'm very pleased with the cover. I have, can you get my bag? Yeah. I have a friend who has written books on sports, but he told me when you do these kind of events, you want to do a reading from the book because everybody expects you to do a reading from the book, but don't make it long and then go on and talk about the book. So I'm going to do a reading from the book just because that's what I was told. My friend is Buzz Bissinger, who wrote Friday Night Lights, which is a very famous sports book and a social commentary type book. And so I'm going to follow Buzz's directions here. So I'm going to read this slowly. As one looks back on life, no matter how fragile or overbearing one's ego may be, I would like to believe in John Donne's meditation, that no man is an island. In that belief, we didn't get to where we are by ourselves. We got here because of a parent, a teacher, a mentor, a friend, a drill sergeant, a coach. We got here because someone cared, yelled at us, kicked us in the rear end, or demanded no breaking point. We got here because someone believed in us and gave us a sense of hope. But hope must start somewhere, that little kernel of belief that one can achieve something in one's life. It might start with a look, a nod of the head, a pat on the back. It may continue with a correction, an observation, or a teaching point, but it makes a difference. And that is what Ara Parseghian was all about making a difference. He never took an opponent nor one of his players for granted. If you were an All-American standout or just a walk-on holding a blocking dummy, you were an essential part of his team, and he made you feel that way. Now, he was not beyond getting irritated or yelling or correcting mistakes. His voice would rise, and all heads would turn towards the tower because he was the coach and controlled your life. You were 18 to 20 years old. What did you know? Nothing. What did you have? Nothing but memories. And it was those memories that made you proud, made you special, made you part of a legacy that lives on forever. God, country, Notre Dame, the Fighting Irish. Go, Ara, go. Ara, stop the rain. One man created those memories, but you must understand he was just a man with fears, dreams, insecurities, like the rest of us. That is what this book is all about, a possible roadmap left behind by a man that we all loved to help us navigate our own lives. Now, I have to tell you, I believe that was beautifully written, and I can say that with some authority because I didn't write it. That's the foreword written by Rocky Blyer, but in a very short amount of words, he captured what the biography that I wrote was all about. It was about personality and character, about a very significant person, both in athletics and at Notre Dame, and he lived, as they said in the recent Wall Street Journal review, An Extraordinary Life. And so we're going to talk about that. And thank you for coming. I appreciate it. So that's Rocky Blyer and Father Ted. This was when Rocky got out of a rehab for his injuries in Vietnam on the sideline of Notre Dame Stadium. I was there, and when he walked to the microphone holding a cane, we all thought he would never walk again. And obviously he became one of the great stories in Notre Dame football history. And Father Ted is legendary. But what people don't know is that Father Ted and Ara were actually very close friends. One of the disappointments in the book is I wasn't able to capture all of the correspondence back and forth because I couldn't get permission from the general counsel's office in time to have Father Ted's letters be made permission so we could put them in the book. But I did put the ones that Ara to Father Ted. So if you read the book, you'll see some of those. But what a marvelous decade we had in the 60s. Father Hesburgh appears on the cover of Time magazine in 1963. Ara gets on the cover in 1964. And then we have two players, Jim Seymour in the back and Terry Hanratty, get on the cover of Time magazine in 1966. Where else but at Notre Dame could you have a president, a coach, and two football players be on the cover of Time magazine, which in those days was a pretty big deal. So what's the background of this? How did the gods out there decide that Mark Hubbard was going to be the person that would write this book? It's kind of an interesting story. I'll get through it. My brother and I worked on a book called Forgotten Four. I did a lot of the research because my brother doesn't fly. He lives in Boston. He did most of the writing. I did the cover, and I did a lot of the photographs. So we collaborated on this book, and people thought it was a very, very good book about a team that hadn't been written about before, the really undefeated 1953 team. We got some notoriety, obviously. Regis Philbin thought it was pretty good and put us on national television one morning. You don't get that from everything you write. And it led to a second opportunity. Joe Doyle, who was the sports writer here in town, wanted a good book written about the 66 team. He thought the book that was published about the 64 team, Resurrection, was not as good as it should have been, and he wanted somebody to do a better book about 66. And so he plucked me out of the universe because of the first book and because I knew Joe. And he said, well, I want you to be the guy that does it. And so we're going to go out, we're going to meet Ara, and we're going to start you down that process. So that's how I got to be part of the 1966 story, and now an honorary member of the 1966 team, which is one of the great honors of my life. And so I appreciate that very, very much. So the process, how does this all happen? Well, this is the one and only photograph of me in a football uniform. My dad wouldn't let me play football in high school, so when I got to Notre Dame as a 17-year-old, I thought, well, I'm going to now try it out. So I was on the Keenan Hall inter-hall team. In those days, we had 19 halls playing tackle football. Now there's not even any tackle football and inter-hall football anymore. And so this was when I went out the first day of practice. I figured it'd be good to get a photograph. Went out to practice, and on the first day of practice, I didn't even have football shoes. So at practice, one of the guys with cleats stepped on my little toe and broke my toe. It was the end of my football career at Notre Dame. But it was the start of something that I've learned to believe, and that is there are such things as guardian angels, because I would have been killed. I mean, even the freshmen at Notre Dame were really good football players, many all-conference, all-city, and so it was a good thing. But it's not the end of my association with football while I was a student. In 1969, when we were all asked to be excited about going to the first bowl game since 1924, they sent a photographer down from Chicago for United Press International, and he was looking for a pep rally. And he bumped into me at the huddle. I was over there getting a Coke, and he said, "Where's the pep rally?" I said, "There is no pep rally." He said, "I can't go back to Chicago without a picture." So I said, "Come with me," and this is me. I'm the guy on the right with the shamrock jacket. And my friends at the architecture building, we were all there working late at night doing our projects. And so he set up this picture, And he was outside in the window looking into the studio and took this picture. And the next morning I show up the dining hall and everybody's saying, you're on the cover of pick your newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times. This picture went coast to coast. And it became, according to the Tribune, Chicago Tribune, at the Millennial, it's one of the 20 most famous photos in the history of Notre Dame football. And it was completely an accident. So that's my association with Notre Dame football until I started writing books. But this is Joe Doyle. He took me out to meet the coach. The story of how that first meeting went is in the book. But the coach and I got to become good friends. And the reason was because I was able to do an honest book about the 66 season, and especially I debunked the myth that Ara had played for a tie, which was, I call it, the pebble in his shoe that followed him around for his entire life. And he thought I did a great job. I used videotape and I used the game record that was sent to the NCAA. And he said, after you wrote that book, I'm never going to answer another question about that. I'm going to send them your way. And the truth is, I was able to do that. And that cemented a wonderful friendship. And this is Ara and Katie. And I got to see and know Katie very well because I would visit their home frequently. And I was always warmly welcomed. And so when it came time to write the biography 2 years after the coach's passing, Katie called me and said, I'd like you to start the biography. And I said, I'd be delighted to do it. I'd be honored to do it. But it was an enormous responsibility because as I got into it, this was a major figure in sports history and a major figure in Notre Dame history. So what did I do first? I went close to home to try to find a publisher. I wrote a treatment of the book. I wrote an introduction. Actually, it was the preface. And I wrote an epilogue, and I brought it to the people who I thought would be most likely to publish it, which was Notre Dame Press. And I sat down, this is 5 years ago, with somebody at Notre Dame Press. I won't embarrass anybody because they're no longer there. And I was told with great, they were very, very nice. They couldn't have been nicer that, Mr. Hubbard, we don't publish books on football coaches or about sports here. We're a serious press. We only do serious subjects with serious authors, and football is a subject that's been overwritten about here. We don't have any interest in doing that. So I was a little bit dejected, and for 3.5 years, I looked for a publisher while I was writing the book. And so I didn't delay in writing the book. It took me 5 years. I had a little bit of a hiccup when I had cancer, and then the COVID year came along. That kind of took 1 year out of play. But a good friend of Bridget and mine wanted to know what I was doing, and I gave him chapters as I was working on this. You may know retired Professor Walter Nagorski. And Walt said, Mark, this is pretty good. He said, somebody should publish this, and I'm going to take a second cut at the press. And he called his friends at the Notre Dame Press and said, take another look at this, because this, I think, is a quality thing, and it's about a very important figure at Notre Dame. The second time I went in there, I was graciously welcomed, and they said, yes, we will do this project. And so for 1.5 years, I've been kind of under the wing of the Notre Dame Press doing this. And they were very, very helpful, because there's a lot of things about publishing a book that an author doesn't know, especially a novice author. And it goes from getting permission for all the things you have to put in the book. All the quotations have to be either permissioned or cut down. And then, of course, the last part of this, which I call the author's colonoscopy. You have to do an index. So that was the end of the process. And you had to follow the Chicago rules. I was a storyteller, not an author, so they were able to get a good copy editor with me. And so the product that you see that's on the bookshelves is really a collaboration of many different sources. The people that I relied on to give me the information, and the press was a great partner. So I want to give them kudos on tape, since I took a swing at them earlier in this presentation. But they came around, and so we've been great partners ever since. So when you take a subject like Ara in a biography, which I've never written a biography before, and I probably will never do it again, you have to decide what you're going to use as your approach. And so early on, I was thinking about this because obviously the appeal of the book is going to be Ara as the football coach, the sports figure. People are going to relate to that, but football is only part of the story. Ara retired from football at age 52, and he lived until he was 94 years old. And so you had to look at the totality of a man's life from birth until death if you want to do a good job doing this. And so I decided that to make it credible and accurate, I wanted to use personality and character as the central themes. And then football came in as one of the aspects of his life that he was very good at. And the other part is, and this is harder, but is to make it readable. I labored over all these chapters to make them be essentially standalone in the sense if you read the book and you read one chapter and put it down and pick it up another day, you kind of are able to do this in sequence. It's not like the normal biography, but you'll see kind of a beginning and an end and a middle to all of the chapters. So they read in a way that gets the audience engaged. And so I think that part of it was one of the things I tried to do when I was doing this. So here's a short overview of the content because I want to let everybody here ask 10 questions each. All of you here, I assume, are at least aware of Ara Parseghian. I don't always get that. I did a presentation for a Moreau class with freshmen about a week and a half ago, and nobody in the audience even knew who Ara Parseghian was. Of course, nobody in the audience had been born before 9/11 either. We're having a gap in Notre Dame history here that I hope I'm filling with this book. So here we go. This is Ara as a little boy. If he knew I was taking a picture of him with a dress on, he would probably scoff at that. But he was my friend, and I thought it was a good picture. But this is a better picture of his entire family. His father, his mother, and his sister, and two brothers, Jerry, and of course Ara, wearing a sailor suit. He's the smaller of the two boys. And they lived in Akron, Ohio. He was the child of immigrant parents. Little known is the fact that everybody thinks of him as an Armenian person, but his mother was French. And they spoke French in their household until he was 5 years old, because it was the common language between his father and his mother. So, as you'll find out in a minute, one of the big reveals in the book is that Ara was actually raised as a Catholic from his mother's side. So people think of him as an Armenian Presbyterian, but he was every bit a French Catholic, if you wanted to balance that out. So, and it's in the book. You can see he wrote about it himself and gave us that reveal all by himself. This is him as a high school football player at Akron South. I tell the story in the book about bringing this to my first meeting with him. He said, when I sat down, he said, "Well, I suppose you want to hear about the tie at Michigan State." And obviously he was irritated. He didn't think that Joe Doyle should have brought me out to start this process. And I said, "No, Ara, I want you," I did say Ara, I said, "No, Coach, I want you to take a look at this picture." He looked at the picture, he studied it for maybe a full 10 seconds. And then he looked up, he said, "That's Conwell Finley, our tailback." So the Conwell Finley is the African American in the back row. And at that moment, I turned the corner with him. I was no longer going to be the snarky sports reporter. He thought I might have a chance of doing a good book, and of course he liked the result. And this was the start of our relationship that I started with this picture. And luckily I was smart enough to bring it. I was actually lucky enough to find it in Notre Dame archives, so I brought it with me. This is Ara in the Navy. He went from high school to 1 year at the University of Akron, played basketball and football there. Rarely mentioned in any biography. He was from Akron, and he and his brother lived at home and was at Akron. But he went into the Navy. He was essentially the equivalent of a drill sergeant after he did basic training, and he got people ready, enlisted people at Great Lakes Naval Training Center. And if you can't pick him out, he's in the second row in the middle, the guy with the dark eyes and the dark hair. This is his training group, or one of the training groups that he did. And then he would bring them down to various naval locations to have them dropped off to be assigned. And the Navy was a big part of his life because this is where he bumped into Coach Paul Brown, who was drafted to be the coach of the Great Lakes Blue Jackets. They had a real college-level football team, partly for morale, partly for physical training. And so Ara, and when he was there doing his commanding these groups, was able to play on the football team, the Blue Jackets. He was injured, and so he was able to travel with the team, and his first visit to Notre Dame Stadium was as a naval person, and I chronicle that in the book. But he went from there after his service, and he started, he had a cousin at Miami University. He liked Miami University when he visited his cousin, and he said, when I get out of the service, I'm going to go to Miami University. This is Ara as a two-way player at Miami. He left as a junior, but Miami was important to his career and to his life because that's where he met this gal. This is Katie, and they met at Miami University. And the funny story there is her slip was showing. She was walking around campus, and he noticed her because of her white slip showing. Lucky for her, that was the day her slip was showing. But anyway, they ended up getting married, when Ara finished his junior year. He was drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cleveland Browns, which is in a new league, the American Football Conference. And he was also being looked at by the Pittsburgh Pirates because he was a left-handed pitcher. He had great athletic ability. This is him as a Cleveland Brown player. He played 1 year there, was named Rookie of the Year on the team, and then he was hurt in the second year, a hip injury, which really ended his football career. And so he was sitting in January after the second season without a job. Katie was pregnant. He didn't know what he was going to do with his life. And lo and behold, he gets a phone call from, of all people, Woody Hayes, who was the new football coach at Miami University. And Woody was looking for a freshman football coach. And so in some ways, those at Notre Dame can thank Woody Hayes for part of this story, although even Ara would roll his eyes when I mentioned Woody's name. But he coached 1 year as a freshman coach for Woody at Miami, and then Woody Hayes left for Ohio State, and so they had a vacancy at head coach. So the fellow who never coached a football team in his life, at age 26, was made the head coach at Miami University. Kind of happenstance. He was a Miami grad. He was practicing in the off-season with the team. Woody Hayes saw him, liked him, and when they needed a freshman coach, he got the call. And so, as I say, the lifeline in his life was tossed to him by Woody Hayes, and it started his coaching career, which is an important, big difference in his life. I don't know what he would have done if he hadn't been in coaching. Probably would have been a car salesman based on what he was doing and his interest. Anyway, 5 years at Miami. He was undefeated in his fifth year, went to a bowl game, and actually didn't go to a bowl game. He was invited to a bowl game and they didn't go, but he was ranked in the top 20. That led to a better assignment. People recognized him, and he got to be the head coach at Northwestern, and he did that for 8 years. And I make the case in the book that he probably saved Northwestern football because they were at the precipice, and they were thinking of actually disbanding the team and getting out of the football business. Just remember, the University of Chicago was a big football power for many, many years, and they left college football because they couldn't afford it. And Northwestern just thought it wasn't making any sense. But he turned it around, and after 8 years there, 4 consecutive victories against Notre Dame, which got attention by the people in South Bend. The opening came after a lot of down years here, and these are the 3 guys that were part of it. In the chapter, I call it, in my first book, I called it Ted, Ned, and Ed. They made me change it to Ted, Ned, and Moose because they didn't know who Ed was, Edward Moose Krause. And so these 3 guys were the ones that made the decision, brought on Ara, His first coaching year was 1964. We'd only had 2 wins in 1963. In 1964, we were ranked #1 going into the final game of the season and lost with 1 minute and 33 seconds on the clock to Southern Cal. This is the picture that appeared in Life magazine after that loss at the Coliseum. And you can see the anguish on his face. But one of the things that happened is the National Football Foundation named Notre Dame the national champion that year. So while Notre Dame doesn't count that as a national championship, it should, because it was a legitimate outfit that actually named them national champion. And this is a photo when they delivered the MacArthur Bowl, which at the time was symbolic of the national championship. And you'll see this photo in other places as if it was delivered for either the 66 team or the 73 team. This was actually a photograph when they gave the national championship trophy in 1964. So I include it there. So this is what it looked like to me sitting in the stands. We had Ara on the sidelines. In this picture there, from left to right, you have Tom Pagna, you have Brian Bullock, who was an assistant coach and became a coach here for all of Ara's career and then beyond, and a good personal friend. Jim Seymour, one of the guys on the cover of Time magazine, Coach Ara, of course, and Johnny Ray was the defensive coach. He's the one kneeling down. So this is kind of at game time, but it was a great picture that captured everything. 65 wasn't such a great year, but 66 was a wonderful year. And the team went undefeated, but had a very famous game at Michigan State, which I wrote about, the 10-10 tie, and ended up finishing the season 51-0, beating Southern Cal, and was named undisputed national champion, which is the subject of the book that I wrote prior to the biography. But Ara had very good years, and finally we were getting into bowl games. You saw the cover of the book. But we get to 1973, and 1972 was a terrible year. We didn't do very well. We got just crushed by Nebraska in a bowl game. So there was no reason to believe 1973 would be a good year, and it turned out to be a national championship year because we played Alabama the final game of the season, #1, #2, and we won 24-23. And this is the famous photograph of Tom Clemens throwing to Robin Weber from the end zone that cemented a first down, and we were able to run out the clock and win by a single point. So that was his first national championship year. He went on to get a second one. That was the second national championship year. And then he retired at the end of the 74 season. And he did it for reasons we can discuss, but he knew that it was taking a toll on his personal life and his health. And so what did he do? He took a year off. Then he became a television commentator. And this is Ara as the #1 college team with Keith Jackson, who in those years was the voice of college football on ABC. He did that, I think, for 5 or 6 years, then went over to CBS and worked with Brent Musburger. So he had a broadcasting career. That's another phase of his life. He also did work with Ford Motor Company. The one that's got the football relationship, not selling cars, was this. He was instrumental in the punt, pass, and kick contest that was sponsored by Ford, and it still is being conducted. I don't think Ford is still sponsoring it. So he had a career in public relations and in broadcasting, and basically also had an insurance business here in town. Some of you probably knew that. He was part of a reinsurance business here that was very successful. So he was able to substitute real money for his meager salary. When Ara left here, his salary was $35,000 a year, which by today's standard is just ridiculous. And when Dan Devine came in the next year, he got paid $75,000. So he wasn't bitter. He knew it was time to leave, and he was able to substitute that money. For that, he was given an honorary degree by Notre Dame, obviously, and he was recognized by Northwestern, and he's now part of the Cradle of Coaches arcade outside the stadium at Miami University. And of course, we're all recognize this. the Ara Parseghian gate and Jerry McKenna's famous statue that captures the photo on the cover of the book. He was a member of the College Football Hall of Fame, which was kind of the pinnacle of his career, but had a lot of accolades throughout his career, and I was able to see all of these in his office, which now Katie has most of them over Holy Cross Village. So there were surprises along the way. And one of the surprises was, as I already mentioned, that I was named an honorary member of the 66 team. And so I'm very proud of that because the team voted that. And this was at the 50th anniversary banquet. And there's the coach and I was able to get this picture, which I treasure. But along the way, Ara had heartache in his life. Most of you are probably aware of that. His daughter had multiple sclerosis. She got married and lived in Akron, but ended up succumbing to the disease. And just when that happened, you would think all the tragedy in his life was over, but it wasn't, because 3 of his grandchildren were discovered to have Niemann-Pick type C, which is an autoimmune disease. Cindy and Mike had 4 children. One didn't have the combination of genes, young Ara, who's a surgeon in Scottsdale, but the other 3 children all died at an early age, which was terrible. I mean, you can't imagine what it would be like to lose 3 children, 3 grandchildren, and how that would affect a family. And Ara dedicated the last 20 years of his life to raising money for Niemann-Pick research. So this photo is Dean Crawford in our science deed here, now the president of Miami University, did bike trips, and he would raise money for the foundation. And this is Greg Crawford and his wife Renata coming after a cross-country bike trip and all the money they raised. And so that was his way of kind of dealing with that tragedy, was to do something positive and raise money for medical research. And I'm told, and it continues to grow, that about 2 years ago it was $40 million and counting. And it's still the #1 donated to project at Notre Dame when we have Notre Dame Days in the spring. They raise a lot of money because football players and people that love Ara contribute to it. But this was a picture of my last visit. This is one of my former students who got a PhD in sports psychology, and I brought her out to meet Ara. This was May of the year that he died, 2017. And we got this picture. She was holding the book, and we were sitting at the dining room table just sharing stories. And I said, "Coach, when are we going to start your biography?" And he would always rebuff that. He said, "No, we're not going to do that. I don't want to do that." And little Amber, the gal here, said, "But Coach, if there's ever going to be a biography, what should the title be?" And he laughed. By the way, when he was rebuffing that, I got this. This next slide is the look. The football players all knew the look. When I would say, "Let's write the biography," I'd get this look. So, but Amber asked a good question, and he said, "Well, if we're going to write a biography, how about Ara, A-R-A? It reads the same forward and backwards." So that became the title. He titled the book himself, and I got the look. And somebody on the sideline captured this picture. You know, our friends over the archives, Elizabeth, found this, and she said, "You have to have this picture in the book." And so there's Ara with the look. And then Katie wanted me to write the book. And when I got to her home the first time, she had coffee and muffins. And she said, "Mark, how much do I have to pay you to write the book?" I said, "That's not the way this works." So we started that. I have over 30 hours of her on tape. I had access to all of Ara's files. And she was really a partner, because Ara was a saver of the written word, and he was very good at writing things at important times in his life. So a lot of what you'll find in the book, if you read it, is authentic, his own words. And so I tried to use wherever I could his own words or firsthand accounts from people that actually knew him. Because I find that when I started to read sports writers' accounts, a lot of it wasn't accurate. A lot of it was hyperbole. So this is really the real McCoy in terms of the real data about his life. And I show this picture because Bridget and I now, this will be the 4th or 5th year, that every year on her birthday, we take Katie and Mickey Bullock out for dinner, and it's now become a tradition. So that's one of the great surprises in our life. And Katie has now become a very, very close friend, and she moved from Granger to Holy Cross Village. Another surprise happened just recently. After the book was written, lo and behold, I'm reading the newspaper on a Sunday morning, and I say to Bridget, I'm in the book. It was about that. I'm in the paper. Yeah, the book is in the paper. And here it is, a very, very favorable review in the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, it's a big deal. Yeah, and so that's got a lot of attention, and we really don't quite know how it got there. No, I mean, I know that things get sent to publications, and whether they get read or they don't get read. I don't know whether Buzz Bissinger made a call. I don't know the answer, but it's been really a great thing for the book and for the credibility of the book. Right, but a lot of other people got early copies. Right, from there it was out of our hands. And this writer, Lane Higgins, what I like about the review is that it actually addresses what we tried to do in the book. It's about personality and character, and as she said, a life well lived. So that was one of the things that was a surprise to us. So what's the epilogue here? When Ara passed, there was a lot of ceremonies here. It turns out what we learned is that in his lifetime, there weren't that many color photos of Ara, because color photography wasn't that big a deal, and he was never on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And the photo wasn't a photo, the picture on the cover of Time was a piece of art. So they actually dug this photo out that was kind of, I don't know, somber, and it was appropriate for the time. But here is Ara and his family as a young person, and I've gotten to know all of them except for Karen, who passed away before I got to know her. And then these are the children that his grandchildren, and the three in the front all died from Niemann Pick type C. Ara, the one in the back next to the coach, named after his grandfather, is a surgeon, as I mentioned. He's an anesthesiologist in Scottsdale. And Ara took that tragedy, turned it into something positive, and you're all aware of the Ara Parseghian Medical Research Fund, which is doing so much good. And recently, they have announced that there is a treatment, not a cure, so they can lengthen anybody who has this disease, lengthen their life. It turns out this is a rare disease. There's only fewer than 1,000 people in America that even have this, and it's a genetic combination. So now people can be tested for it if they think they have a chance for it. But, you know, to lose 3 children, what a tragedy. So now it's time for you to ask the hard questions, which I'd be delighted to answer, and we can. It's time for audience participation. You know, there's the cover of the book. Questions? Yeah, please.
So, first off, thank you very much for a great presentation. You listen to football players talk about their coaches, and their relationship with coach can be like a friend, like a father, like a ruthless dictator. In your studies, what would the players who played for Ara say about
He
him?
was more on the ruthless dictator. I say this with all respect. Eric came out of the Navy and he was a drill sergeant. And Paul Brown and Woody Hayes would have been, I would say, post-World War II kind of very high discipline coaches. And so the players that came there all knew he was probably the best prepared person in the stadium for that game. And they respected that. And he really was very well organized, so his organizational skills were really tantamount to his success. And he was innovative. He had a lot of innovative things that he did with sending in signals and using TV on the sidelines, and it became illegal after he did it for 2 years. But those kinds of things were part of his innovative, and I think really, he's a high intelligence guy. But he was not trying to make everybody his friend, except after you left the team. Everybody on the team that had any interaction with him, and it's virtually everybody that I've ever talked to, said after you left, you were one of his guys, and he would do anything for you. And so they all have instances of a letter to a parent or showing up at a banquet he had the relationship with with his players afterwards. It was very warm and very sincere, and they all view him really as kind of a special person. I can't tell you how many times people have said it's like a second father to me. And so that's my way of answering that. But if you were on the practice field, he was demanding on the practice field. I hope that's a good answer. Yeah.
So you mentioned the cradle of coaches
Yeah.
at Miami, and so he was there working with Woody Hayes. Who else did he intersect during
Well,
his 6
he was
years
he was
there?
only there in coaching with Woody Hayes 1 year. Then he became the head coach. And then when he left Miami, he actually brought Bo Schembechler with him to Northwestern. So in the cradle of coaches at Miami, Paul Brown is there, Woody Hayes is there, and of course Bo Schembechler is there. But the other ones, and we just had people from Miami University come. They're going to do a documentary about the cradle of coaches, and they filmed Katie and they filmed me. But there are 10 coaches in that. And so you have Earl Red Blake was part of that, and there are some coaches that are after Ara. Jim Tressel is after one of the Harbaughs, not the idiot Harbaugh, but the other one. But there are 10 guys in that cradle of coaches, and they're going to try to do a documentary and highlight each one. And Ara was the first one they were using, so they came for the Miami game. Kind of a surprise because they showed up with a van and 8 people and 3 cameras and multiple microphones. We did it in our basement. So they're serious about making this into a good documentary. But it's not just football. There are cradle of coaches people like Walter Alston is in the Cradle of Coaches Association as a baseball, and there's a basketball coach or two that coached there and went on to do other things. Yeah. Oh, you brought over the Cappy Gagnon questions.
No, I'm nowhere near that league, but thank you. Just something you actually highlighted in your talk. He retired as a very young man. Just wondering if you go into the reasons behind that, because now there's coaches still doing it, and they're much older. Thanks.
Oh yeah, and some should retire earlier. Anyway, the answer was, I would say, disguised in the material that I saw. I saw all of his files, and I would talk to him about this. He loved college coaching. Okay, he liked the environment to raise his family, and he loved Notre Dame. I mean, this was his ultimate job. When you were a high school kid, Notre Dame was the pinnacle of all of football. I mean, pro football wasn't very much in the late 30s, early 40s. And so, as I point out in the book, the prophecy in his high school yearbook was destined to become the head coach at Notre Dame. And so he thought he had reached it. And of course, the pressure to win was always there, but his daughter had just been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. That was a pressure. And he was having to do a lot of extracurricular work, have side hustles to supply money for his family, because $35,000, while it was a good salary, was really just probably, on the way low side of what college coaches even then were making. But he didn't ever leave or want to leave. So he was very busy, traveled a lot, and then it got to the point where he felt stress. I think, one of the people that I've done a lot of radio shows and blogs, and they said, what you say was his number one personality characteristic? And I would say courage, because he had the courage to know when to stop, when to walk away. That, there's some medical evidence in the files that he'd been talking to his family physician about this for a number of years. And think about this. He was as famous, at least as famous as Nick Saban would be today. He would be on the cover of, Time magazine. How many people are known by their first name only? It was one of my convincing arguments to the press to just use that as a title, because you can use a lot of things about that in the title, but there's probably not 25 people in sports and probably not 10 in college football that you could name with one word as his first name. So he was very, very famous. But how many people have difficulty walking away from that? It's hard to walk away from having notoriety and being a kind of a famous person and people all wanting to be near you or getting autographs signed and so forth. And he walked away with it because he didn't want to put in jeopardy either his health or his family. And I thought that took a lot of courage, a lot of courage. But he showed courage later. I mean, how do you deal with the death of your daughter? And he did a lot of fundraising for multiple sclerosis in her lifetime. This is before he even knew that his own grandchildren had basically a life sentence. And then he spent the last 20 years of his life raising money for a medical cure. Never saw it, but a lot of money for medical research for Niemann-Pick type C. How do you convert your grief into action and dedicate yourself to that, and then start a foundation? And he wasn't, when I would talk to him about this, he never got morose about it. He had worked through it. Katie told me they cried for weeks when they found out that this was going to happen. And then he turned it into a cause, which, was really all about his personality. He was able to do that. And I thought that took enormous courage. I'm not sure any of us would have the courage to do that, to stick with it for 20 years. And so I got to meet the era of his last 12 years of his life, which was really, as I say, a blessing to me. I mean, I got to know Father Hesburgh very well, and I got to know Ara very well. In my lifetime, I could never have guessed as a 17-year-old freshman here that I would have those two experiences. But what a great thing to be able to say, what a blessing for my family and for me, because, those are two of the giants in Notre Dame history, and I got to know them both pretty well for various different other reasons. But, did I answer it correctly, or not correctly, but in a satisfactory way? Yeah. Yep.
I don't have an intelligent sports question, but when you were talking about what a blessing that is for you just now, I was thinking that, well, it's a blessing that you wrote this book then to share those experiences with
Right.
us and the wider world, because some people could just, sit around talking about it at their dinner table and
Right.
not present it like this. So thank you for doing that.
Well, you're welcome, but the person that really stepped forward was Katie. It took 2 years, but she knew it was important to do. The love affair of Katie and Ara is really part of the book.
I was going
You'll
to
read
ask
it from
about
the,
that.
and she was a big part of his success at home, taking care of all the home front type stuff. And even though Ara would joke about not wanting to have a book written about him, she knew that it was important to do it. The blessing was that she called me. Luckily, I knew her, and she'd been called by a couple of other authors that wanted to do it. And she said, "I'm going to have you do it because you knew him, and I think you'll do a good job," which was an enormous responsibility. And I took it as such. You don't hear this about authors, but, and I'm not an author. I was trained as an architect. I worked in broadcasting. If I had to make a living writing books, you don't make a living writing books. That's the bottom line. Anyway, the nicest compliment I have gotten, I've gotten many, many, many. I was pulled aside by Monk Malloy at a book signing. Quinn, I think you were there, and I went over and I talked to Monk. And I said, "I understand you read the book and you liked it." He said, "Mark, you did a great service to the university." So he understood the magnitude of having this person be written about in the context of Notre Dame history. And the fact that he said that, and that I did something that was recognized by him and that I can leave behind at the university, really makes me feel good. I don't take pride in the fact that I'm a good writer. I think I put this together in a way that I told some good stories, but I really did capture the person. That was the key thing. And I think in that regard, I think I really got to what I was trying to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And how long were they married for?
They were married from I got to get the dates here right, 1949 until his passing in 2017. A long time, and yeah.
58 years. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
3 children.
fantastic. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's, and I don't want to diminish this in any way. Katie is as interesting a person as Ara was. I mean, we all think of Ara as the coach, but we've gotten to know Katie and her backstory. I mean, her father died when she was 13, and she lived during the Depression with her mother running a store and delivering groceries in Greenfield, Ohio. So the background of these two young people were actually quite similar. One of the strange things, and you get these moments, because you kind of open the door on this one. I found out that my father and Ara were sworn in exactly the same day at Great Lakes Naval Training on April 1st, 1943. Now, the H's and the P's were in different barracks, so they didn't know each other. But it's one of those like aha moments when you see that and you think, God, how, you know, if I hadn't written this book, how would I have ever known that? You know, and I talk about this in other contexts. Is after you write a book, and maybe it's just me because I've kind of had this illuminating moment. It's easy to look at some of the benchmarks, the big events, in anybody's life. It's the graduations and the successes. In his case, the wins, the losses. A successful career, a great marriage. But you look at things and you start to see what I call inflection points in everybody's life. There are little inflection points. And it's caused me to be more kind of looking at my own life. So in his life, his brother forged his mother's signature to play football as a junior in high school. Now, that's an inflection point. If his brother never signs that name and he never gets to play junior year of high school football, Ara Parseghian is not part of Notre Dame history. Probably a third or a half of the buildings on campus never get built. I mean, I'm maybe exaggerating, but he was the momentum that fueled Father Hesburgh and Father Joyce to start Notre Dame down a path of academic excellence and adding new buildings and adding co-education. I mean, the growth curve was fueled by football. Because when I came here in 1967, this place was threadbare. I mean, they put me in Keenan Hall, which was the new dorm. And now, I mean, if you've been in Keenan Hall, it's kind of like a cinder block prison. But that was the new dorm. And so, but just think of that one inflection point. His brother never signs that document, and Ara Parseghian might have ended up doing something else with his life. He would have been successful because he was that kind of a motivated guy. If Woody Hayes never calls him and says, I need a freshman coach, he never coached anything. He never had any background in coaching. So you see those in your own life. I'll give you an example in my life. I visited my high school friend on an Easter break one summer, in 1969, and I met this girl on a blind date. And as you can see, I guess it went pretty well.
Hooray!
But if I don't visit my friend at Harvard on Easter break, that never happens. And so all of you here, if you really just kind of sit back and think, what are the tiny little inflection points? And when you write a biography, if you're not looking for them, but all of a sudden you start to see them. And that was really important. For me, it kind of kept me going. It was the fuel that kept me going to do this. Yeah.
I actually had a question.
Yeah.
So with today's coaching challenges, with the dreaded transfer portal and
Yeah.
all of the challenges in, well, I'm just repeating myself now, in college football, do you think that Ara would have had similar success today?
Let's put it this way. I think he would be disgusted by what's happening because he really enjoyed the student-athlete relationship. He was a student-athlete himself. He coached at good places. Northwestern and Notre Dame are high academic places. And he wanted to make sure that the athlete got the student side done, got his degrees. So he was very pro-student-athlete. I think now that we've seen it uncoupled, he would be very disappointed in the trajectory of college football. And the answer is, on the field, he was very innovative. He probably could have succeeded with different players and different teams and different positions because he was that smart. He was able to be outwit his competition. But the thing of it is, he would be, I think, unhappy with the status of college football. And I've been asked this question a lot on the radio, for example. Should Notre Dame stay independent? And my answer back is absolutely, because I think college football is such a mess that it's going to take the leadership of a place like Notre Dame to pull it out of where it is. And we, whether we like it or not, the DNA at Notre Dame is heavily college football. That's how we started. That's how we've gotten a name, a brand, but we're respected. And if somebody's going to come along and say, okay, what do we need to do to change this, to fix it? And I think if you're independent, as a Notre Dame independent, you might be able to be in a leadership position. So I hope we don't ever lose the independence so we can do that down the road. That's just my own personal view.
We have time for one more question. I have another question.
If you haven't bought the book or read the book, please go do it. I'll tell you this, I don't make any money on the book. The author's royalties I'm donating to the foundation. So, and it's not like you make a lot, but I promised that to Katie on the first day. So if you buy the book, you're actually contributing to the Neiman Pick Foundation. And to me, it's just been a labor of love and a way to meet nice new people, to get to meet new people in the sports world. And so the payback for me is, it's been a great thing to expand and make my life more rich. And so for me, that's been the benefit to me, And I'm delighted you were all here. Next year, we're going to fill the audience across the hall there.
Yes, we are.